Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations, that Star Wars podcast that just likes to do things from a little bit different perspective, because as we know from my favorite character, it is all about perspective. And I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, coming at you from the hallowed ground of Coruscant's Dex's Diner, who make the best Convery Nerf steak omelets. And with me, as he is every single week, the illustrious Brenner Eater, Jedi Master John Mills.
Well, I mean, honestly, I'm more waiting for them to launch Baylan Skoll's beer, because obviously if he's traveled to another galaxy to find a lost recipe for great power, obviously it's a brewery in a different galaxy that he is in search of, because I know that's the only thing that could get me to leave this galaxy. So there you go.
Yep, high alcohol content, that's what matters. So
it's a minimum of 15% ABV.
There you go.
There you go.
Oh, well, different gravity too, so you never know how that's going to play into things.
It's got to be a stout. There's definitely a stout. That's it.
Oh, he's definitely a stout man, or a porter man. Either one. I mean,
he strikes me though as surprisingly he's one of the. Well, you know what? That's not really the place to posit
it's a whole other podcast.
We'll talk about it some other platform.
What are the favorite drinks of our Star Wars characters? So that's a podcast.
You know what? We
right
could
there.
talk about that during our Thanksgiving episode.
Yeah.
Later this year.
That's going to be fun. So, well, of course, you could find us wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, if you are listening to us right now, we would appreciate it if you just subscribe wherever that is. You can always help us out with a star rating and review, especially on Apple Podcasts. It's been a long time since anybody has reviewed us. And in the myriad of Star Wars podcasts, it helps people find us. If you like us, we would love it if you would interact with us over on X, Twitter, whatever that's called. We're at the Jedi Masters. It's a great place to also share the show. And, word of mouth is the best way to have a podcast grow. So if you like us, share us with your friends. You can also find the entire network on Twitter at Join Nerd Party. You can find us online at thenerdparty.com. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/thenerdparty, as well as Instagram at the Nerd Party. So, John, we have just finished Ahsoka. That series is wrapped up now. We actually did our complete review of the series over on the 602 Club together, which was a blast. And this is something which has been percolating in my brain ever since we recorded that episode. And you mentioned something that I found really interesting, and it was this idea of the weirdness of Star Wars. And one of the things as I was thinking through the series is just how much weirdness there is, and how I feel like that's in some ways something that's been kind of missing from Star Wars for a while, which is the truly weird, but also the truly weird that actually has something to do with the story.
Well, from live action, for sure. I think that animated has always embraced it, and I celebrated Ahsoka
Absolutely.
specifically because it feels like they finally kicked the door down and they said, okay, we can get weird in live action as well. And if anything, I think that follows an impulse that Lucas had when he wanted to make the sequel trilogy.
Yes.
He wanted to get weird with it too. And I think that there has been an impulse in a lot of movies, and I think Marvel, this is once again the poison that Marvel has put out there, is the idea that you have to couch it in this scientific-y, sort of Star Trek-y approach to things. You have to explain it, and you have to say, well, it's really the tachyons interacting with... No, there's the world between worlds. There's the Force. There's the Jedi. There's space hyenas. There's whales that can travel faster than any ship that exists. I mean, think about it. It takes Morgan Elsbeth how long to build her giant hyperspace ring? And never mind the fact that I love the fact that it's a hyperspace ring, because that just brings back a thing that's weird in and of itself. I remember when they brought hyperspace rings into the prequels, I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, what a great explanation for how a small ship can go to deep space, because that was a big thing about the TIE fighters, was there's no way a ship that small could get this deep into space, is what Obi-Wan says. And it's because by this point, obviously, he knows the Empire's not interested in sending one-man fighters out into deep space, sort of thing. But let me throw this out at you. I think that for some fans who have watched it for a long time, they don't understand what a fundamental shift it is to bring Purrgil in at all to the series. That in and of itself is a giant, weird hurdle to come into. And it's why they have to keep teasing the Purrgil a little bit. Oh, look, there are Purrgil here. Oh, wait, what are the Purrgil here for? Oh, the Purrgil are going where we want to go. And that winds up providing that context. Do you think it's possible that just longtime fans just have basically, we've been so spoiled by the weirdness that was in the animated series, including Bad Batch. Bad Batch has, like, the Bad Batch themselves that's a weird concept. And so we don't appreciate what a giant milestone was reached by getting that weird with live action Star Wars.
I think the thing that's so interesting about this, because you bring up the Purrgil, which obviously is one of the weirdest things in Star Wars, the idea of space whales. Of course, we had the flying whales in Episode 2 on Kamino, which I always loved them as a species as well. And so apparently George Lucas just has a thing for whales, even more than Star Trek 4 does, and so, which is great. But but I think the idea that there are these creatures who are the only ones for the longest time that were traversing galaxies. And then you get weird by saying it's the Dathomiri witches who are from another galaxy, were the first to tame the Purrgil to get to other galaxies. Like, that is weird, man, for Star Wars. Like, that's a crazy idea. And then the fact that we're introducing to live action the Dathomiri witches and the Great Mothers, you know, I mean, that's never been seen in Star Wars. And that's, I mean, from the Clone Wars, that was an incredibly weird addition. This idea that there were these witches that had these magics, and it was linked to the Force, but it's not quite the same. And of course, you know, I know the Dathomiri witches come from the EU, but but they're their own thing here in the Clone Wars, and then of course here in Ahsoka. So yeah, I mean, like, I think you're absolutely right in just calling out this idea that animation, I think, really set the stage for the things that we could get weird with. You know, you think of the Zillo Beast, you know, one of the weirdest things you've seen in Star Wars ever, really. And I feel like one of the things that Dave Filoni learned from George, and we see it here specifically in Star Wars, it is these weird elements that kind of make Star Wars what it is. But these weird elements aren't just for the sake of something being weird on screen, but they all actually really do have an important story reason for existing. And so I think that's the thing that kind of got lost in the live actionness of it. In fact, you remember the Andor episode where they have the eye, you know, that they have to go through?
Yes.
And it's just this really weird idea of this kind of like mystical and yet scientific, and it's like the crossing of those boundaries there. And like, even a show as grounded as that found a way to do something weird that we'd never seen in Star Wars, right? And it was for an incredibly interesting story reason. And so I think that that's something, those are the type of things that have just kind of been missing from Star Wars for a while in what we do in live action. And I really appreciate that we're kind of diving back into that in a way that makes it kind of like truly exciting, because coming to these type of shows, then I don't know what to expect, right?
Well, there's very much the fact that Star Wars has always been classified as space fantasy, not science fiction. And Yes, there's sound in space, there's the Force, there's all of this stuff, and there is an embrace of the spiritual and the not quite physical. And for all of the accolades that I and everybody else on the planet throws at The Mandalorian, when you're dealing with something like cloning, that's still sort of a thing that's like a sci-fi thing that people are, they're grappling with in their own minds because they know that we're approaching the point where we could do cloning, although it's never going to be, we're not going to be mapping a personality onto somebody. That's just not going to happen. But so cloning keeps it in that sort of quasi, quote unquote, realistic sort of vein of sort of things. I think the weirdness that we're talking about is the fact that the weirdness that we're talking about has nothing to do with being rational. It simply is. And I think that's an important thing, specifically because if there's anything that spirituality, religion, intuition speaks to, it's this belief, and it's one that I subscribe to absolutely, is that there's not always a rational explanation for what you're experiencing. And so are we going to make an attempt to explain how the Purrgil go into hyperspace to traverse the great distances that they do? And the short answer is no. No, we are not, because we don't need to. All we need to know is that they do it. There's no need to have an episode where somebody tells us how they manage to figure out how the Purrgil are able to do it. All we need to know is that the Purrgil do it. And that is the sort of thing that I think is a difficult story element for people to grapple with sometimes, is why did that happen? Well, it just did. Does it matter? And I think that, let me get your thought on this. Do you think that some people reject it because we've been so conditioned to expect an explanation for it? And the it being whatever it is, we expect an explanation for the mechanics of it, whether it's World Between Worlds, whether it's Purrgil, anything like, whether it's how the sisters figured out how to tap into the Force in their magical way. We're never going to get that explanation. We're never going to get Geordi LaForge telling us how that all works with invented terms. It's just going to be a thing, the way that certain things in life are just a thing. Do you think that that is a hurdle for people?
I think that's a really good question. And as you were talking, I was thinking about this idea, and I'm going to get super spiritual for a minute, but for you and I, we both come from the same vein of thinking, which is that all of reality was created by God.
Yes.
And therefore, because all of reality is created by God, in many ways, there's no such thing as the supernatural, because God is reality. He created it, and he's what we would consider supernatural. So, and that kind of, I think, flows to my thought process about the craziness and the fantasy elements of Star Wars, right? These things are so woven into Star Wars because what we know of the Star Wars universe is that the Force binds it all together, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's what allows there to be these kind of crazy things happening. Whether it's space whales that can, jump to the different universes, or, just midichlorians, all of this type of stuff, right? All the weirdest stuff in Star Wars, it all comes down to the fact that the Force exists. And I think that's the thing that, at least for me, it's one of those things where it makes it work for me. And I think that's the thing maybe sometimes where people lose that aspect of Star Wars in some ways, in the sense that we forget, like you said, this is fantasy as much it is if anything, it's sci-fi fantasy. It's those two things together. And fantasy has always had a much deeper connection with the magical, the mystical, the supernatural. All of those type of things all come down to there's something otherworldly that we can tap into. And I think that that's a really interesting thing for me, to be able to then, I think it's when people miss that idea about Star Wars that they do kind of get lost.
Yeah.
And that's where, you find people, I think that they just kind of miss it about what Star Wars is and what can happen there.
Well, I think also when Star Wars gets weird, there is an embrace of the idea that there is Star Wars getting comfortable with the fact that not all of the audience is going to be along with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where your strongest storytelling sits, is whoever's at the helm, whoever it might be, not sitting down in a boardroom and saying, well, whatever we construct has to appeal to the largest possible audience, but saying, look, they're either with us or they're not. And let's just put it out there, and we'll either have fans or we'll have haters, and that's fine. And we'll just walk away with it. As opposed to, look, the entertainment none of us like is the stuff where we can tell that a board or a producer or a room of producers or whomever sat in a room and said, well, that's great, but can you give us this as well, because we want to try to tie in this sort of thing with it. And when Star Wars is weird, it is a commitment to the idea that we don't care about the merchandising half so much as we care about the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I can respect something that says, I don't care if you're along for the ride. There are times where I don't respect it, because I think where you also get into it is when Star Wars gets weird, it's also throwing down the gauntlet and saying, if you haven't been paying attention up to this point, I'm not going to slow down for you. You have to make a commitment to keep up or disengage. And this is the sort of thing that I struggle with. Is I'm always a big fan that if you come into a sequel, you should get up to speed and be able to plug in with what's going on. I've said that numerous times.
Right.
And I think the Ahsoka series does it. I think Bad Batch does it. I think Tales of the Jedi does it. But I will admit that if you haven't watched the material leading up to it, the weirdness gets lost on you. The distinction of being able to look at Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati's lightsabers and say, those aren't quite red. Why are they not as red as Darth Vader's saber? Why are they orangish? And Star Wars doesn't explain it, but leaves it there for you to say,
yep.
So why is it different? And it's one of those things where they tease you with the idea there could be an explanation, or like the Purgle, there might not be.
Right.
And it's something for you to discuss. I like that. I go along with it. I like not being spoon-fed everything. I like the fact that we can sit here and we can say, is it because Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati are a little bit different? Is that why their sabers are a little bit different? Is there something significant about the color of their sabers because they actually have a compatriot who has a truly red saber? Why is his saber that red and why is theirs not quite red? And you wind up talking about it. And it gets back to the no definite answers sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. And I think that's one of the things that I find, so interesting just about the series in general. And just where Star Wars does seem to be going and kind of embracing that idea of the weird. And I'm excited that that's the case, because I find that to be where the Star Wars series is so subtly unexpected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it allows you to be kind of awed. And I think that's something that we kind of miss a lot of times in our entertainment these days, I think, where we're just able to kind of sit back and go, wow, that's cool, right? And part of that is just being able to, I think, really enjoy the weird, the crazy, the out there, the fun. And, that's, I love that kind of thing. And I appreciate in many ways, that Star Wars is allowing us to be able to experience that again through a series like Ahsoka, or what they're doing, something like, the stuff we see in the Bad Batch, or, any of that. I think it just makes it so much fun. And yeah, I really, really enjoy that aspect of this show specifically. I think Ahsoka has done a great job in that. And I think that this will happen, but I hope that it's something that continues, right? I hope that it's something to where we're not afraid to get crazy. Let's just get weird with it. And at the same time, I think it's worth saying that this is not weird for weirdness sake. This is stuff that they're doing that's truly there to move the story forward, but also to give us that kind of wow moment.
That is an important distinction, because you can get wacky with something. Like, there's a difference between wacky and weird. And when you're just getting wacky, it doesn't land the way that this does. And I know that there are probably people sort of like banging on whatever device that they're listening to, saying like, oh, well, I didn't love Ahsoka as much as that. And that's the thing, is I think what pushes me over the edge with Ahsoka is, for all of the stuff that I would typically sort of nitpick in terms of technical stuff, is it gets back to exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, I know the weirdness has a story purpose. Just like I knew in the prequels, when something happened where I wasn't quite with it at first, I was like, okay, I know there's you know what? I'll throw midichlorians right out there. Where my first thing was like, And I had to walk out, and I started thinking about it. I actually wound up warming up to episode 1 very quickly and really digging it, because I realized that a gauntlet was thrown down where it said, this is a wacky idea. You have to think about this. What does that mean for these sorts of things? And it's like, yes, like you said, it has a story purpose. It has a reason. It has a driver behind it. It's not just a decision for the sake of a decision. It has a purpose to it. And you can feel that there's a purpose with these things that we see here. And, to pull it out of the context of Ahsoka and put it in just to the second season of The Bad Batch, there are some crazy concepts in that as well. Mm-hmm. There's a crazy concept at the core of Bad Batch about Omega also being a clone of Jango Fett. And it's something that I think, my hope is that the reaction to Ahsoka has been positive enough with the weird aspect of it, that it'll bring people over to other storytelling that's happening in Star Wars that also embraces the weird. Tales of the Jedi embrace the weird.
Yeah.
Just that, the storyline with Dooku, or the thing that happens with Ahsoka, where, when she's an infant, like all of this stuff, it embraces the weird, and that's what's interesting. That's what keeps it from just being a plain old sequel to something.
Yeah, I agree. I think I can't wait, to see what's going to happen next. One of our friends, Bruce Gibson, we were talking back and forth the other day, and he was like, I can't wait for what comes next for Star Wars. I don't want to wait. And I'm like, man, I'm right there with you, man. I don't want to wait either, and I'm excited to see where we go next with this saga, and Ahsoka is a big part of that. But I'm just as excited about Bad Batch 3 and Andor season 2 and all even the idea of the skeleton crew sounds really interesting to me as well. So all of these things that are coming here, I'm ready for, and I can't wait to see what happens next. But if people wanted to catch up with you and talk about their favorite weird elements of the Star Wars universe, where would they find you?
Well, gosh, they would find me out there between galaxies as Kessel Junkie, sending out a random signal that occasionally gets picked up. You can also find me right here on the Nerd Party Network, co-hosting a show called House Lights that I co-host with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser, where we talk about the works of directors through different combinations. And you can actually find me appearing every so often on the 602 Club over there on TFM Network with you, Mr. Matthew Rushing.
Well, I'm excited about that. I always love when you join us, and hopefully people will check that out. You can find me all over the place on social media under the name Matt Rushing02, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero. You can also find me here on the network with Owlpost, talking about Harry Potter, one chapter at a time with Drea Kaufman. You can also find me over on the TFM network with a bunch of shows. Like John said, you can find me there in the 602 Club, talking about all those franchises that we love outside of Star Trek. Then you can find me inside the Star Trek universe with Literary Treks, The Orb, Warp 5, Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. But John, I think it's time to get back to the temple. I hear that gong ringing for our nightly meditation session, so I think it's time to close these negotiations.
I shall continue meditating on what Baylan Skoll's preferred brewery would be. And Master Rushing, I agree, these negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.